Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 4th of August of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about southern Ukrainian direction. Today the Ukrainians, for the first time since the beginning of the use of Su-24 with Storm Shadow missiles, published the video of how they were bombing and attacking the territory of Russian Federation and the territory that was captured by the Russians during the special military operations since the beginning of this operation. In this video we can see Su-24 that was launching Storm Shadows. The video was geolocated, of course. The Ukrainian Storm Shadow was flying above small village by the name of Yasna Zorya, about these farms, and the Ukrainians were attacking the territory of Crimea and Kherson exactly from this point. And few hours later, we got, right after the Ukrainians published the video with Su-24, we got another important update that are coming from Luhansk, the capital of LPR, Luhansk People Republic. The Ukrainians attacked the territory of the city with some cruise missiles, most likely with Su-24 and with Storm Shadows. As a result of attack, as you can see, there was a very heavy explosion. Most likely the Ukrainians attacked and destroyed and damaged some bases, military bases, headquarters, ammo depots or something like this. Anyway, if you take a look at this picture, we can see that the consequences of attack were pretty huge. Now let's move to the line of combat contact. We have additional updates, and we are going to start with Ivanivka tactical bridgehead. After a very short pause, the Russians resumed their attempts to attack in the northern direction, and today the Russians published the video of how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces in Ukrainian positions along the main road between Blagodatne, Urozhaine and Velika Novoselovka. The area, as you can see, was under very heavy fire. The Russians were bombing this territory either by multiple launch rocket systems or with 12 flamethrower systems. Anyway, if we increase the number of updates since the beginning of months, we see that the Russians are pretty focused in this direction. Most likely they're about to resume the attempts to move further in the northern direction towards the village of Blagodatne. Now let's move further. Today we got additional video from Prichistovka. The Russian sources published the video how they were attacking the Ukrainian positions with self-accurate missile Lumur, and as a result of attack the Ukrainians lost another temporary position, maybe some machine gun position or some base with radar or something like this. This village was under very heavy Russian pressure and focus in June and July, and the Russians continue bombing and attacking the village in August. Most likely these Russians have some plans regarding this territory. Now let's talk about South Donetsk direction in details. We have a lots of videos, as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, and since the beginning of August we've received significant number of geolocations, and if I would like to point your attention that a lots of geolocations are coming from the second line of defense in South Donetsk direction. As for first line of defense, we are talking about the cities and villages like Zolotaya Niva, Prichistovka, Ugledar, Vodyane and Kostiantynivka. So this is the first defense belt, and as for the second defense belt, we're talking about Shakhtarskaya, Novoukrainivka, Bogoyalinka, Katerinovka, Antonovka. So this is the second defense belt, and now we see that the Russians are moving their focus from the first defense belt towards the second one, which confirms that the Russians are getting closer and closer. And the main point is that the Russians are moving their attack FPV drone operators, these attack forces, which is also very important because this type of attack, this type of damage the Russians are doing is much cheaper in comparison with the use of Lancet or with the use of artillery or with the use of different types of weapon. Lancet FPV drones are very cheap. Also, we have another video from the another stronghold, one of the most important stronghold in this direction. We are talking about Vodyana coal mine. The Russian sources published the video on today how they were bombing and attacking this stronghold with FAB 500, most likely 2 FAB 500, arrived exactly in the point and damaged significantly Ukrainian positions. Now let's talk about the city of Kostiantynivka, or the ruins that left from the city. In the previous video, in the morning we were talking that the Russians launched a full-scale attack offensive operation in this direction. First, there was a very powerful artillery preparation, but yet during the day we haven't received anything that can confirm additional Russian progress or whether the Russians managed to capture additional building and or to enter. So for now we see complete silence. Maybe tomorrow or the day after we're gonna receive, or we're gonna start receiving additional updates. Now let's talk about Krasnohorivka. Today the pro-Ukrainian mappers and pro-Russian mappers and neutral mappers confirmed that the Russians didn't stop in the central part, in the northwestern part of the central Krasnohorivka. The Russians decided to move further in the western direction, and as a result of clashes during the previous few days, the Russians improved their positions significantly, and as we discussed in the previous videos, most likely the Russians will continue moving until they reach the western outskirts of Lazovo Strait. It is very important for the Russians to get this territory, because from this point the Russians will be able to control everything in the cities like Kurachovka, Girnik, Kurakhove, and all these villages inside of this agglomeration. And we see that the Russians began implementing this plan. Now let's talk about Pokrovsk direction. We have a lot of very interesting updates and details, and first we're going to talk about the report that we received from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the group of forces south managed, or center managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Novoselovka Persha. So the village was captured, and based on this report we have adjusted the map and added additional red color over the territory of farms that are located to the southwest of the village. Furthermore, as for different mappers, the pro-Ukrainian mappers are saying that the Russians managed to improve their positions even further in direction of the village by the name of Mizhova. Furthermore, I would like to point your attention to this small triangle, Pticha, Kamyshivka, and Mizhova. As you can see, we received significant number of geolocations, and we can say that the end game for this artillery pocket has begun. And the Ukrainians still have significant number of forces in this artillery pocket between Skuchna, Mizhova, Umansk and Novoselovka Persha, but the only thing we know for sure that Ukrainians are trying to evacuate as many as possible armored vehicles, personal carriers, personal soldiers, weapon, everything they can, and they're just running away, but the Russians, of course, they see everything, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians established certain control over the road, because they understand this is the only way how the Ukrainians can evacuate. The Ukrainians have no electronic warfare equipment in this area. It's just like a game. It's just like to try your own luck, whether you will be successful or not. And as we can see, according to these geolocations, most of the Ukrainians were unsuccessful trying to cross the river and trying to escape this cauldron. Significant losses, as you can see, significant number of armored vehicles and personal carriers were destroyed. And in the end, when the Russians realized that there are still lots of Ukrainians there, they destroyed the only bridge that Ukrainians had in this direction to cut the evacuation completely. In this video we can see another Russian missile strike. As a result of this attack, the bridge or the dam or something was destroyed. We don't know for sure whether this attack reduced the Ukrainian evacuation possibilities completely, but obviously their possibilities were shortened as much as possible. Now let's move further. Let's talk about additional changes on the ground, and the most important are coming from 0542 road. According to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to cut the road 0542 and to split this direction in two directions, and basically to create another cauldron for the Ukrainians who are currently located in this small stronghold. So the road was cut. Everything, as we discussed in the previous videos, are coming to true. Furthermore, the Russians are improving their positions according to different mappers. Now we can make a conclusion that even Zhelane was already encircled, has been already encircled by the Russians from the west, from the northwest, from the north, from the northeast, and from the east. Most likely the Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group will try to move even further in the south, in the southeastern and the southern directions, with the purpose to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities for evacuation completely. We should expect this progress of sabotage and reconnaissance group within the next hours, not even days, and then the Ukrainians will be forced either to fall back from Zhelana completely, or they will be encircled and they will stay there forever, or to surrender. Of course, we should expect that by tomorrow, a short video, this stronghold would be captured by the Russians as well, and this territory would be colored. Now let's move further. We have additional progress in the village of Veselaya. Today, the Russian sources published the video of how they were moving inside of this village, and as if you take a look at this video, you're going to see that the Russians were pretty comfortable, were pretty sure that everything is okay. There is no, let's say, attempts to hide or to, if that they're afraid of something. So this video shows that the Russians are pretty feel themselves pretty okay in this village, which confirms that most likely the Ukrainians are far as possible far away from this area. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps, and we did the same. We have colored this small block of the village under the color of Russian control. Furthermore, we start receiving additional updates about significant progress of armored forces of Russian Federation inside of the village by the name of Ivanivka, and according to different mappers, including pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, and neutral, the Russians captured and control right now over 50% of the village. So this information was confirmed by different reliable resources. So this is significant progress, as you can see. Furthermore, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians also improved their positions in the fields between Timofeevka and the village of Progress. So now Ivanovka is about to fall. As we can see, most likely this is going to happen during the next few days, and then the Russians will begin the storming and the assault of Lysychine. Also, we can make a conclusion that Zhelana is also going to fall. We haven't received anything about additional progress of the Russians in Sergeyevka, so let's wait, of course, for additional updates. Now let's move to New York agglomeration, to Toretsk agglomeration. As you can see, we have a lots of very interesting updates and geolocations, and the most important is that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Zalizne. The last residential areas were captured by the Russians. We have geolocation that confirmed this. The video was published by the Ukrainians of how they were FPV droning the Russians all over the entire line of combat contact, and one of the episodes was geolocated exactly in this point. So we see that the Russians are moving towards this energy infrastructural object, and if the Russians are able to capture this territory, then the Russians will establish complete fire and physical, maybe sometimes FPV drone control over the main supply roads that Ukrainians are using right now to support their forces in New York and Nilipka. And currently we are talking about this road. So this road, if this road, the Russians cut this road, then it's going to be very difficult for the Ukrainians. Now let's move further and let's talk about the citadel, the Terikon of Artyoma. Today some mappers, neutral mappers, confirmed that the Russians entered the landfill, they entered the stronghold, and as a result of clashes, the Russians secured completely the Pioneer Avenue. The Russians secured the industrial zone, not industrial zone, probably main office of this Terikon, maybe this is something like energy facility object. So the Russians captured the most important buildings that are located in the base of this landfill. So most likely tomorrow the Russians will secure the landfill completely. Furthermore, the sources are saying that there are no more Ukrainians in this area. They have abandoned these positions. The only reason why the Russians haven't entered the landfill is a significant number of drones that are flying above this territory, so it can't be a very fast process. The Russians will enter the landfill, but they need some time. They need maybe a day or maybe a little bit more. We have adjusted the map in the Pivnichne. Today the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russians in this part. In this video we can see FPV drone strike, and this video confirms the Russian presence exactly in this point. And based on this video we have adjusted the map and added additional control by the Russians. So we see that the situation is getting worse and worse. We have additional videos of complete and full Russian control over the main supply roads between Toretsk and Pivnichne. The Russians discovered the position of another vehicle, probably FPV drone operated, kilometers, and they attacked this territory and destroyed it. We have the Russians began bombing the next citadel, the first Toretsk citadel. Of course, there are going to be very heavy clashes for the northern Pivnishny citadel. We are talking about another landfill, another tericon, about this territory, but when this citadel falls, the Russians will be forced to fight for this citadel. Of course, it's going to be very difficult one battle, but let's say based on the experience and based on how the things are going inside of this area, we see that the Russians may do this very fast. Now let's move further and let's talk about Chasiv Yar. Today the Ukrainian sources reported that for the first time since the beginning of the battle for Chasiv Yar, the Ukrainian sources confirmed that yes, the Russians do have their foothold, their positions on the Ukrainian side of Seversky Donetsk Donbass River. Now, as I understand, the things are going to start developing much faster because we're going to receive additional updates from pro-Ukrainian sources. Also, the pro-Ukraine mappers Deep State published additional analysis about the current situation. The armed forces of Russian Federation are trying to gain a foothold on the western bank of the canal in the Chasiv Yar. The situation is very dynamic in the city itself because the armed forces of Russian Federation crossed the canal in groups of 4, 6 or 8 people and tried to establish themselves in private houses. Fortunately, it is possible to destroy the Russians, but while the one group is being eliminated, a new one has time to run over. So the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians, first of all, have significant superiority in the manpower. Now let's talk about Sivers. The Russians are storming the railways between Razdolovka and Perezhne. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published significant number of videos of how they were attacking the Ukrainian positions along the railways in Perezhne and Fyodorovka with significant number of FPV drones. So during the previous few days, we were talking a lot about artillery strikes, about FAB strikes, about different types of explosions inside this area. We saw the videos of how the Russians were storming Ukrainian positions, and now we see the phase when the Russians began clearing this area with FPV drones. So most likely the next step is the physical presence of the Russian soldiers between the buildings of Fyodorovka and Perezhne. We can start counting days, as I understand, when this foothold, when these positions of armored forces of Ukraine are going to fall completely. Now let's move further. As for Kupiansk direction, we haven't received anything from this area, just regular artillery activity. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainians significantly with different types of weapons, with different calibers, with different types of drones and so on, but without any changes on the ground. And this operational pause, as I see, is going for too long. For the last time when the Russians stated about additional progress in the vicinity of Pishana took place probably 2 weeks ago or something like this, maybe a little bit less, and after that no progress on the ground at all. So it's very weird and very interesting. Maybe the Ukrainians either managed to stabilize the situation or the Russians for now try to reduce as much as possible damage, and then they will begin. We don't know for sure. Now let's talk about Kharkiv area, and we see that there are also no changes on the ground, just the regular Russian artillery activity. The Russians are bombing this territory with aviation bombs. The Russians are bombing this territory with flame tower systems, with everything they have. We can see everything in this direction, but we don't see the Russian progress. Neither the Ukrainian, of course, but according to the Russians, the Ukrainians continue the concentration of their forces, and maybe very soon they will conduct few more attempts to counterattack the Russians with the purpose to restore control over some part of Kharkiv direction. You know that since the beginning of Kharkiv offensive, the Ukrainians tried everything. The Ukrainians tried to concentrate forces in Tikha and to attack from the east. The Ukrainians were trying to counterattack in the north of Chasiv. The Ukrainians were trying to counterattack the Russians in Staritsa, Prilipka, Burgovatka. The Ukrainians were trying to counterattack in this area. The Ukrainians were trying to counterattack in Gluboka, and every single attempt of armored forces of Ukraine was repelled by the Russians, and the Ukrainians suffered losses. And today the Ukrainians opened new direction in Kharkiv area. Now they decided to check the defense, the situation with Russian defense in the area of Luhansk Luhansk, and during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians published a series of FPV drone strikes all over the entire village. The Ukrainians were flying, were attacking the Russians, trying to understand whether it's worth to try their luck in this direction as well. So most likely during the next few days, the Ukrainians will try to attack the Russians significantly exactly through Luhansk, trying to, let's say, to maybe encircle the Russians, or I don't know, maybe just to get any results since the beginning of May, because just losses and just the one defeat after another. As for Sumy area, today the Russian sources published the video of how they were bombing the Ukrainians inside of this area as well. Now let's move further, as I understand the wrong video. Yes, we need to change the video for this. Now let's move to Kiev. We have additional updates. First of all, the Ukrainians are very worried about the prisoners exchange, are very concerning about the prisoners exchange process that took place between the United States of America and Russia. Then, if you remember, the states lifted some sanctions from Russian financial organizations. So we see that the relations, of course, are not friendship between Russia and United States of America, but they're getting better. Obviously, they're getting better, and the last steps were done to improve their situation, and the Ukrainians are very worried about this, and they understand that there is a process that they can't control. On the other hand, we see a report that the world-known financial organizations downgrade Ukrainians' credit rating to pre-default. This is very important. Ukraine, for you to know, have a lot of money in their bank accounts. They have gold and many different other assets, and they do have possibilities to pay for debts, but for some reason the Ukrainians decided not to do this, at least in this moment, which I believe they will not pay ever. And of course, we have the final report about F-16s. 10 machines of this type were already arrived on the territory of Ukraine. The next 10, the Western countries promise to give additional 10 F-16s by the end of this year, and they will increase the number of these fighter jets till 75 during the 2025, 79 during the 2025. So this is very important, and first of all, this confirms that nobody is going to start any negotiations, any peace agreements. Everything is going to continue, and the war will be prolonged in 2025 only if the Ukrainians all over the entire Ukraine are not going to begin riots, because, for example, for the first time since the beginning of bloody mobilization in Ukraine, people of Ukrainians, just regular Ukrainians, managed to raise the number of people in the city of Kovel and to force the recruiters of Ukraine to release three young boys that were captured, of course, illegally somewhere on the checkpoint of the northwestern part of Ukraine. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.